Good afternoon. Welcome to the Department of Labor's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs Brown Bag Luncheon Series. The OFCCP enforces laws that require federal contractors to do two things. Number one, not to discriminate, and number two, to use affirmative action to promote equal employment opportunity and to prevent discrimination in the workplace. That includes construction as well as non-construction. Today marks the 20th anniversary of the publication of goals for women and minorities in construction. It is therefore only fitting that we reflect on the progress and the challenges to promote opportunities for women in the industry. And now I have the distinct honor to introduce our illustrious leader, former director of the Women's Bureau, and now the 23rd Secretary of Labor, Alexis Herman.
Thank you very, very much, Shirley, for your introduction. And thank you for your leadership of the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. You've done an outstanding job of making sure that our programs are responsive to the needs of the American people. And I also want to acknowledge Assistant Secretary Bernie Anderson, Dr. Anderson, who is also with us today. Of course, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance is housed in the Employment and Standards Bureau here at the Department of Labor. It is a special pleasure for me to be here today at this Brown Bag Luncheon and to welcome Susan Eisenberg, because I will tell you that for me, this is literally a 20-year commemoration of the very first executive order that I had the opportunity to work on as director of the Women's Bureau when I served here at the department under the leadership of President Jimmy Carter. And so to be here today, to listen to Susan and to recall the many stories and the hard work that not only went into the formulation of those regulations, but more importantly, the experiences and the real issues that, in my view, took a very significant step for all of us to make sure that we were opening up the doors of opportunity for women, especially in non-traditional jobs. I can recall that it was my own experience, having worked in the shipyards of Pascagoula, Mississippi, prior to coming here to the Department of Labor and working with Gloria Johnson, who is with us today. Gloria was there 20 years ago when we signed those regulations, working very closely with the Coalition of Labor Union Women. And it was working in the shipyards of Pascagoula, Mississippi, that I had spent 2 to 3 years recruiting young men for skilled apprenticeship jobs. And I shall never forget the day that a young woman came up to me and she said, "Ms. Herman, you know you're spending so much time helping all of these young men get into jobs as skilled apprentices, as carpenters, as boilermakers, as electricians, as sheet metal workers." She said, "What about me? Why can't I get one of those good jobs?" And I remember thinking to myself, what about you? Why can't you get one of those good jobs? It had never occurred to me as a young social worker in Mobile, Alabama, and working in the shipyards, that these were also jobs that young women should take advantage of. And that became for me my first real introduction and the first time that I really thought about the fact, you know, these are good jobs. And women work for essentially the same reasons as men do: to care for themselves and their families, and for the joy and dignity that work itself can bring. And so I worked very hard with that young lady from that day on, and I was proud to see her become the first female apprentice on the shipyards in Pascagoula, Mississippi. She went into the electrician's program, and the rest is history, as they say, because we have spent literally the last 20 years, and really before that in terms of laying the foundation, of making sure that we opened up the doors of opportunity for women in skilled apprenticeship jobs, for women in the construction industry. And it was the promulgation of those regulations 20 years ago that at least put the federal government on record saying that it was important to open up these good-paying jobs to women so that they too would be able to take advantage of the experiences and the opportunities. And as I look today at all of the work that has taken place in our nation to open even wider the doors of opportunity for women, we certainly recognize that there is still a glass ceiling. And unfortunately, there are still too many glass ceilings for women who now build those ceilings, for women who build the houses and the roads and the bridges. And what we have to do is to make sure that we continue to do the work to bring down the barriers, to open the doors even wider, so that women can continue to participate in non-traditional jobs, especially in areas like the construction industry. And so I welcome you today to the department, Susan. I look forward to our discussions as we continue to inform ourselves about the need and the work that still must be done. On last Friday, when I announced the employment situation report, I pointed out that we also celebrated Equal Pay Day in this nation. Now, Equal Pay Day, for those of you who may not have had the opportunity to mark that historic day, was the day when a woman actually makes the same amount of money that a man makes in this country. The problem is that it actually takes a woman 1 year and 92 days to get to the same place that it takes a man to make the same amount of money in 1 year and 0 days. Making sure that we continue to open up the doors of opportunity in construction and in other non-traditional paying jobs in this country today is a way that we can close that pay gap. It is a way to close the pay gap where a woman today makes only 74 cents for every dollar that is earned by a man. If we can make sure that we get women into construction, that we get them into other non-traditional opportunities, not only can we close the pay gap in this country, we can also ensure that as we go forward together into the 21st century, that women and men will have the opportunity to share equally in the bounds and the benefits of this great nation of ours. So again, I thank you for being here today, and I look forward for the time that I can be here to the discussion and to your insight, Susan, on what you can share with us from your personal experiences about what we know today when it comes to the participation of women in the construction industry, women in non-traditional jobs. And Gloria Johnson, it's always a pleasure to welcome you to the Department of Labor. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And I want, on behalf of OFCCP, to express our thanks for your support and for the support of Assistant Secretary Anderson in enabling us to do our jobs and to host this Brown Bag Luncheon. The next person that I would like to introduce has become a good friend of mine. We met in Geneva this past December at a meeting on the glass ceiling, an international meeting at the International Labor Organization. Gloria Johnson has served as the president of the Coalition of Labor Union Women since 1993. And prior to her election to that position, she was CLU's treasurer for 17 years. In 93, Ms. Johnson was elected Vice President of the AFL-CIO, the second African-American woman to hold that position. Ms. Johnson serves as chair of the IUE's Women's Council, a position to which she has been elected for the past 10 years. She joined the International Union of Electrical Salaried Machine and Furniture Workers in 1954. As a bookkeeper. Maybe we need to take the dates out of these things. And at the present time, she serves as director of the union's Department of Social Action, responsible for activities in the areas of women's rights, civil rights, education, and safety and health. Gloria Johnson has represented American labor for many years. She's well respected, has numerous awards, far too numerous for me to mention. But let me mention in one particular instance that she's on the National Executive Board of the A. Philip Randolph Institute and chair of the Board of Directors of the National Committee on Pay Equity. I give you Gloria Johnson.
We are going to have to do something about those dates. But since you mentioned the dates, why not keep on going? And I want to share a very special figure with you. Last October, I had to stop and think, Alexis. Last October, and I think that's on the resume, my husband and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. I mention it only because they said it wouldn't last. But anyway, when Shirley called and asked if I would come over and be a part of today's program, I was positively thrilled. I am also a friend of Susan's. I've known her for several years, and it was a great opportunity to see her, to introduce her, and to see a very dear friend for many, many years, our secretary, Alexis Herman, a friend, as I said, for many years. But my responsibility this afternoon is to introduce Susan Eisenberg. Susan began her electrical apprenticeship in 1978 with Local 103 of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And she was among the first women in the country to achieve journey level status. Her nonfiction book, We'll Call You If We Need You, Experiences of Women Working Construction, and her poetry collection, Pioneering, are now available, and I encourage everyone in the room to get them both. Selected in 1991 as an International Research Associate in Women's Studies at Northeastern University, Susan began gathering oral histories of women who entered construction unions in the late 1970s. Her research and cultural projects have received support from the Massachusetts Foundation for the Humanities, the Ms. Foundation for Women, the American Association for University Women, and the Samuel Gompers Union Leadership Award of the City University of New York, to mention just a few. For the first National Women's Conference of her union, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, held in Washington, D.C. in September 1997, our sister participated both in the planning committee that directed the construction industry sessions at the conference and submitted as well follow-up recommendations to the union's International Executive Council. I should mention that in addition to being a member of Local 103 of IBEW, she is also a member of the National Writers Union of the UAW. Whenever I can talk union, I talk union. She has been a featured speaker at conferences in British Columbia, Washington State, Washington, D.C., Michigan, Connecticut, Vermont, and Massachusetts. Involved with policy issues for tradeswomen at the national level, she has led workshops on gender issues in the workplace for the George Meany Center for Labor Studies, the Harvard Trade Union Program, and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. She is a contributor to more than 24 books, most recently Modern American Women, Commonwealth of Toil, and For Crying Out Loud, which addresses women's poverty in the United States. She currently teaches in the Labor Studies program at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and has, for the past 9 years, directed Women in History, a series of theater performance workshops at the Boston Public Library. She holds a BA in Women's Studies from the University of Michigan, an MFA in Poetry from Warren Wilson College, and a Master Electrician's license from the state of Massachusetts. Susan has worked in the construction industry for over 15 years. Join me in welcoming Susan Eisenberg.
Pioneering for the tradeswomen of '78. She had walked into their party uninvited, wedging a welcome mat in the doorway for other women she hoped would follow along soon. The loud ones argued to throw her out immediately. Even her supporters found her audacity annoying. But once they saw she mingled with everyone, drank American beer, kept conversations going during awkward silences, and was backed up by law, the controversy calmed. She surprised them. She was reliable. She always gave her best. She was invited back. She became a regular, always on the fringe, expected to help out just a little more. When she stopped coming, they were confused. Why now? Hadn't she challenged custom, stared down rumors, ingratiated herself years ago so that now her presence was only mildly discomforting? She never explained. After all those years, hurling back cannonballs, womanizing the barricades, firing only if she saw the whites of their eyes. It was the lonesomeness of pioneering that broke her resistance. All those silences about what mattered most in her life had worn her. Like the slow eating away of acid on metal, the damage only visible over time. On behalf of tradeswomen, women who across this country work as carpenters, iron workers, electricians, painters, sprinkler fitters, plumbers, pile drivers, elevator constructors, laborers, operating engineers, and so many other trades, I want to very deeply thank Secretary of Labor Alexis Herman and Deputy Assistant Secretary Shirley Wilcher and Gloria Johnson for bringing public attention today to this very important economic issue for women. Access to jobs that have higher wages and better benefits that have historically been reserved for men. There is no place I'd rather be today than right here. I'm delighted to be able to bring some of the stories and perspectives of women in We'll Call You If We Need You to the Department of Labor on this 20th anniversary of the federal goals and timetables that open construction site gates to us. and I'm delighted that you're all concerned enough to be here. I really wish all the women in the book could be here too. So you'll just have to imagine them. When I began this interview project in 1991, I just thought I'd be writing a few articles. It became this book, I think, very much for the same reason that women are nationally still only 2.5% of that workforce, even though the goals and timetables established 20 years ago should have led us by now to being roughly 18%. And that's that the entrance of women into this historically male industry is a complex issue. It requires us to reconsider deeply held beliefs that we each have about gender, about what men and women are interested in, what men and women are capable of doing. But didn't we work through that more than 50 years ago? During World War II, there was public recognition for Rosie the Riveters as capable workers. And we're all familiar with those images of the Rosies as women who enjoyed and were proud of their work. So let's not keep revisiting those long ago resolved issues women aren't capable of or aren't interested in this work. What was not publicly established, though, until affirmative action of the 1970s, was women's right to do this work. Not temporarily holding a man's job until he wanted it back, but as her own job and career. I think as a society we're still struggling to embrace that concept, that women are as entitled as men to jobs with good wages and benefits. And I think that's the source of a lot of the resistance that's described in the stories of this book. Last fall, I had the privilege to be here in Washington for the first National Women's Conference of the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, of which I am a proud member. And it was an open and inclusive conference that welcomed all members. The construction industry branch gathered together there, and in working sessions we developed a punch list, which is a construction term for the tasks left to be accomplished before a project can be considered completed. For the project we called the Full and Fair Inclusion of Women in Our Industry. What was clear to participants at that conference, and becomes clear, I hope, to readers of We'll Call You If We Need You, is that the full and fair inclusion of women in our industry is not a goal that can be achieved by tradeswomen alone, no matter how valiant, no matter how resilient, no matter how persevering they are. And that the cost that ends up being paid when tradeswomen do go it alone is unacceptably high. What to me has been most exciting in approaching this 20th anniversary of the Federal Affirmative Action Guidelines is the refocusing of this issue as a joint venture of government, organized labor, community groups, and tradeswomen. Because of the many harsh stories connected to this history, and let me say that keeping the percentages this low, despite interest and ability, means that a lot of effort goes into discouraging and containing. One surprise to me during interviews with tradeswomen pioneers was the consistency of the response to my question, did you think this was a good choice for you? The lack of regret, the affirmation expressed about being a tradeswoman, whether people stayed in or left the industry, is a testament to why the fight to open these jobs remains important for reasons beyond only economics. So I'd like to read first from a chapter in the book called And Yet Passions. And let me just say here about the book that it's not written the way oral histories are traditionally done, with one person's story told at a time, but it's written thematically and more like a novel, with the main character essentially being the movement of tradeswomen as a whole through the industry. not always of one mind, as sometimes we disagree with ourselves or agree with ourselves. So let me read from Passions. And this chapter is written sort of one voice leading to another voice. Lorraine. I worked on this Ohio building for 3 years. I was in heaven. The vibrations and excitement of these people actually putting this together, it was ongoing. Everything was cooking. It's like being a kid. We get to play with this and fix it and put it together and make it go. Make it be actually there. There's nothing, and we put something there, and it's there. It's like a rock. It stays even. I mean, look at this amazing building that goes up to the sky. Part of working on this Ohio building that I loved a lot was being around the ironworkers. The guys I worked with were still walking with a lot of pride. I mean, who can walk these beams up in the middle of winter? I can't. Most guys can't. You'd never see most guys up there. It's a special breed of person. When I worked at the top, I was doing parapet walls on the edge of the building. We were hanging off on the side on guy lines and safety belts. It was our own world. You'd go up there, didn't matter what else was going on in your life. You forget about everything but what you have to do in front of you and your safety and your partner's safety. When you get a pause, you just take in the magnitude of where you are. You can see forever, 45 stories up. It's something most people don't get to do. So when you get that pause, you don't start thinking about the problems in your life. You start enjoying where you are. You become your own country. I think up there, I just started walking taller after being around these ironworkers. I felt I got respect from them. They weren't afraid to hand it out if you deserved it. Marianne. From an early age, I recognized that tools had a magical appeal, that they were very special, and that only certain people got to use them. I always was very aware that my brothers got the tools, whether it was a chemistry set or whether it was getting to work with my father to put in a new set of stairs. I deeply resented, and I'll try to get over this sometime in my life, at Christmas one year when my brother, who was a few years older than I, got a chemistry set, and I got a toy broom. My brother Jim would take the time to show me how to do some real basic kind of things. I remember we had this big garage. We collected a lot of driftwood from the beach and we'd cut it up to use the wood stove. I was hacking away at the stuff and he showed me how to use a handsaw so it doesn't screech and it doesn't make any noise, to use it like a musical instrument. Maura. Almost any woman I've ever known who's done some welding has been surprised at how much they liked it. There's something about it, something about the rhythm of it. To do it well, you need to really have all your senses working. The sound, the smell, the look, seeing the color changes and liquid puddle changes. You have to observe all of that to do a really good job. Cheryl. You could work in the state of Ohio. You could work in the state of California. You could leave the country and go to work in another country. You can go any place and use this knowledge, and it's going to keep you employable, regardless to whether you work in a union or whether you're freelance. When you're out there on your own, you can still generate funds to support your family. I have 2 children, and I'm a sole provider for them. Kathy, my kids know which bridges in town are mine. I'm proud of that. Randy. On 2 Union Square, I worked layout for all the glass that had to be set on the whole building, which came in panels, spanned floor to floor. By the end, when they finally took away the man lift, the pieces had to all fit. The last 13 pieces had to fit in there, fold in. I like that part of the trade, that it's got to be right, and it's got to look right. I've worked on a lot of high-rises in Seattle. I can drive by and say, I put the face on that building. It's something there to look at, to see. Helen, starting on something from scratch, from the ground floor up and topping it off, I don't know of any purer delight than that. I chose to interview the women who were among the first to enter the industry, partly because it was such a raw and dramatic time, and therefore really illustrates many of the issues very starkly. But also because these are the women whose experience of recruitment advertising, hand-on training programs, monitored job sites led them to have high expectations. The regulations established in '78 blueprinted a course that should have led us to the construction workforce just past the start of the millennium, becoming a quarter female, making the occupation no longer what is called non-traditional for women. Speaking personally, when I started in the trades, I fully believed in 1978 that those policies would continue to be fully enforced and carried out, and that the industry would be transformed to one where women's appearance on the job site was ordinary. As a new apprentice, I also believed, and I have to say I was kind of relieved as I interviewed women and I found out that my naivete was shared. So many of us believed that the many capable tradeswomen who came into the industry would, by force of our positive example and by our accomplishments, inspire the gatekeepers to welcome other women and to see the absence of women in the skilled trades as illogical or archaic or silly, an inequity to correct. But that transformation did not happen. Women's overall percentage of the construction workforce grew to roughly 2% in the early 1980s and remained approximately there. The initial percentage goals established under President Carter that were to increase as more women journey persons and advanced apprentices were available were not increased or reached. During President Reagan's administration, budgets for federal enforcement of affirmative action were reduced, and women who entered the construction industry as pioneers never saw their numbers move beyond the pioneering phase. People have asked me about the title of the book, We'll Call You If We Need You, and where that comes from and what it means. And I have two answers for that. In part, it comes from a story of mine. In 1977, after completing a 4-month hands-on seated training program for women in non-traditional jobs, I called what later became my union to find out how to join an apprenticeship. And I was told by the person who later became a very good friend and mentor, the contractors don't want you, the unions don't want you, we'll call you if we need you. And then, in April of '78, 20 years ago, when those guidelines were issued from this building, I was called on a Friday and told to come in on Monday for an interview. It made it very clear to me that affirmative action opened a door. But the other sense of the title is that much too often the policy has been carried out in a way that serves paperwork rather than serving the training and employment needs of women apprentices and journey-level mechanics. So let me read a few more stories. Carpenter Kathy Walsh found that while many of her male counterparts had a relative who could use personal connections to get them on jobs where they could learn a range of skills, the same was not true for women. For the group of women that first went through, we all got pigeonholed into certain areas, and that was where the coordinator kept us. To give him the benefit of the doubt, I would say that he was trying to give us an area of specialty where we could get a lot of experience. I always did form work. Most of the girls did form work, because the Department of Transportation, of course, was the only area that they really even looked at the number of women and minorities out on the job. So doing bridge work and form work, a lot of the women got pigeonholed into that. Later on in my apprenticeship, I was like freaking out, going, oh shit, I'm going to turn out and be a journey-level carpenter and have to compete with these guys for these jobs, and this is the only thing I can know how to do. I tried several times to get different kinds of contractors to hire me, and I never did get anybody to do that. But 2 different contractors actually did call me back to work more than once when a job was finished. With both of those contractors, I was able to just get a little bit of real on-the-job experience hanging cabinets and doing finish work for short periods of time. But boy, I could build you anything out of concrete. Ironically, the jobs to which women were ghettoized tended not to be the ones requiring stereotypically female fine motor skills, finished carpentry or ornamental ironwork, but the duller, heavier tasks. Although she herself got a well-rounded training, many of the women who began their ironworker apprenticeship with Randy Lumens did not. I started out with a class of 5, and I was the only one that finished. I'm thinking, why? Was it so hard? Did they beat them down so bad in the rod patch? If the coordinators would do their job, that wouldn't happen, to make sure that no woman has to spend more than 6 months in the rod patch. That usually is where the need for women most was, because it's highway money, or state money, or dams, or somewhere where the rods were a big part of the contract and they had to have a woman. Then a company would get a woman and they wouldn't turn her loose. It's almost in our apprenticeship contract that we get so many hours of rods. And once you get them hours, it's up to the apprenticeship coordinator to pull you out of that and send you on to structural, to sheeting, to miscellaneous. Finish work's a fabulous part of the trade. If you get your 6 months in rods, why do women end up being there for 3 years or 2 years or even a year? That's too much. That would discourage anybody. I think about rods and I think that's the most back-breaking work I'd ever done. Hauling it out on the decks, big 11 iron, that's ooh. It was the most defeating in the sense that here you've worked your ass off to tighten up this mat 100%, then all of a sudden they come in with their concrete trucks, pour it over. That's why it was defeating to me, because your blood, sweat, and tears is under there, and nobody knows. I have to see results of my work. And Mary Ann. As an apprentice carpenter raising a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, Mary Ann Clordy realized that not only was she not earning enough, but the inconsistency of the work created constant turmoil in child care arrangements. She was laid off from her first job after 3 or 4 months. The job was certainly not finished. I got laid off, I'm sure, because they got the hours that they needed. Female hours. I was out of work for several months. And then I got sent to another federally funded job. That was down in Rockland at the sewage treatment plant. It went on like that. I'd get a job, it would last 2 or 3 months, I'd get laid off, I'd be out of work 2, 3, or 4 months. During those periods of being laid off, I'd go back on welfare. It was no better than being on welfare in the long run. Plus, I still had the problem of who was watching my kids. I had to be on the job at 7. I'd have to get teenage girls in the neighborhood, but they weren't that reliable. Sometimes they wouldn't show up. And then my neighbor would tell me she saw a party going on. Or the kids would complain. It was very stressful. When I would go to school, our apprenticeship school was at night, the guys would be talking about the different jobs they'd been on. And I remember being envious of them because they were doing things like putting windows in and putting roofs on. They were talking about side work they were doing. It was a whole network they had that I didn't. I think I felt like I didn't have any allies whatsoever. I didn't find anybody approachable, and I really got the sense that the only work I would get would be work where there was some sort of compliance going on, and that's when I would get a call. I started looking for other work. I found another job in a completely different field. I gave them 2 weeks' notice. 3 days before I was leaving, I was kind of joking around. I was saying, "Do you only have 2 more days to take me out to lunch?" They said, "You should know, we found a replacement for you." And I remember being struck by what they said. It isn't a woman. I was struck by the fact that they referred to me as a woman. I thought, that was a big advance. But then they finished it with, "It's a nigger." To me, that really summed up why I was leaving. Every day I went home, every day I went to that job, I felt like I had to put armor on. I would just come home wiped out. Not physically, because in fact they weren't demanding that much of me. But emotionally, I was just wiped out. Then there was the whole other component of my kids. I couldn't really guarantee them a stable home life. I feel a very deep gratitude and affection for all the women in this book. I'd like to read one more story, and that's of a woman plumber from the Bay Area who was the second African-American woman in her local and the third woman, and a very important contributor to the tradeswoman community in the San Francisco Bay Area, Paulette Jordan. She died 2 weeks ago yesterday of cancer. Since there was no first-year class in her local when Paulette started, she was placed with the second-year apprentices for classroom instruction and moved along with them until her fourth and final year. And when she went back and studied, she went back and studied the first-year material. At the midway point in her apprenticeship, she assumed her training was on track and that whatever pieces I don't know, eventually I'll learn. I just finished my second year, which means they call you a third-year apprentice. But you aren't. It's the start of your third year. I was out on a job site. They were putting in underground pipe, and I saw these pipes sticking up. There was nothing there but dirt and a few little trenches. The carpenters had just set up some batter boards and pieces of string. I was cutting pipe for this journeyman and bringing him fittings, and I was very curious. I was starting to notice things. I looked over across the field and I said, "What are those two pipes sticking up out of the ground?" And he looked at me. He was down in the trench. He said, "What year are you?" And I said, "I just finished my second year." He said, "You're a third-year apprentice and you don't know what the hell we're doing?" Then I really got nervous. I didn't realize that they were going to pour a concrete slab. That's why the pipe was going into the dirt. It was a residential project. It was going to be a two-story house. All he said was, "One's a kitchen, one's a laundry, and one's for going upstairs." There's 3 pipes sticking up out of the ground about 2 feet, and I'm thinking, oh, God. Okay. He throws this drawing at me. It was an isometric drawing, and I didn't know what that was. I just saw a bunch of lines. All that day he spent trying to tell me that I should have learned this stuff. He didn't have time to train me. They were watching him. About lunchtime, I saw the project coordinator coming toward me, and sure enough, white envelope. Handed me the envelope. I thought I would die. You know how your mouth fills up with salt just before you cry? I couldn't even talk. The guy handed me my check. He said, "I'm sorry, you don't know enough. You need some better training." Oh yeah, I need some better training, but there's nobody who wants to give it to me. I didn't say all that, but that's what I was thinking. That's the excuse they always have. They don't want to be the ones to spend money to have their people take enough time to train you. I went to the union hall. I thought, that's it. They're just going to kick you out now. You don't know shit. It was the first time somebody had said to me, "You don't know enough." And I had no idea how much I was supposed to know. I checked in at the counter, and I told them I was laid off, and I'm sort of wandering around in a daze. What am I going to tell my kids? But for some reason, I think, let's go see if the school coordinator is in. I had no idea I was going to confess to him. "I'm laid off," I said. "How much am I supposed to know anyway?" He sort of looked at me and he said, "What do you mean? What kind of work were you doing?" "Residential. There were some pipes sticking out of the ground. I didn't know what they were. How much is a second year or third year or fourth year supposed to know?" He started scratching his head. "Well, it depends on if your journeyman takes you under his wing. And some people learn fast," and all this bullshit. I said, "Wait a minute, I just started my third year. How much am I supposed to know?" He said, "I don't know." I couldn't believe it. I said, "You guys don't have an agenda?" I really got mad. So he calms me down. He says, "Pull up your chair." He drew a picture of a bathroom with 3 fixtures in it and said, "Now draw the sewer line." And he said, and I drew the sewer line, and he said, "Now where are the vents?" And I didn't know what vents were. I'd heard the term, but I didn't know what the function was. He said, "Everything has to be vented through the roof," and so I watched him. The toilet pipes extended halfway into the middle of the room, and he drew a line back to the wall. I said, "How come you're drawing lines over there?" He said, "You can't bring the pipe up through the floor in the middle of the room. You have to run it back over through the wall and bring it up." A light went off. Something clicked. I think we spent about 3 or 4 hours in his office with him drawing pictures and us talking. It was like the miracle worker, when the deaf girl finally understands what all those finger movements were about. And then he turns around and he says, like it wasn't anybody's fault, "That's why you should have started on residential." Like, how come you didn't put me on residential? Residential lets you see a whole picture within a month. You get to see where things originate from and where they go, why the water lines are run this way, the waste and the vents and all that. I was on commercial for 2 years. I never saw a hole of anything. They were running pipes. I didn't know what they were for. I did thank him. He could have done that all along, but he didn't know I needed it because I didn't know to ask. After that, I was fine. I went home and studied my books. I went on the next job. I knew what things were. I started to understand. This gathering of the 20th anniversary of these guidelines seems like a very important time to each pause for a moment and consider where we would like to see this issue at the 25th anniversary. And while you're having your thoughts, let me read a little bit from the last chapter of the book, which is called Punch List. And I know we're going to be having discussion at the end. Okay, so these are again voices of different women. Irene. I think what would change it most would be enforced federal regulations. I think that's what opened it up, and that's what all the contractors were thinking. Oh, this is going to be enforced. We had better do this. All these other issues, if they have to have women, then all these other things will generate around it. So that, to me, is the main deal. Bernadette. I'm having people call me and say, "Can you get me a trained woman out here? I need somebody with experience." And I'm saying, you're going to have to take some responsibility to give them some experience. Everybody's sort of laying it into that catch-22. We'd hire a woman, but I just can't find one who has that kind of training. When a guy can walk in off the street with no training, but they assume that at least he has the muscles to carry him through. And then it's a game of repetition, so after you've done it 100 times, you can do it. Cheryl. It's not real visible. Like when I got in, I had no idea that construction was going to be an alternative to college or the military. I just happened to find out about it through a relative. Actually, junior high, I would think, would be where the outreach should be, because then they should start preparing in 9th grade for the apprenticeship programs. Nancy. A lot of jobs are working 4-10s. They're working from 6 o'clock in the morning until 5, or 6:30 until 5. The union management needs to address the contractors' accommodations for not only women. There's getting to be a lot more men who have custody of their children. I think child care is a big deal. I think that it's a union problem, it is an industry problem, it is a national problem. What we're basically saying, well, that's the woman's problem, and it's not. And myself. Several conclusions seem fairly obvious. First, women familiar with the industry and crafts do not find any reason inherent in the work itself that justifies the extraordinarily low percentage of women. Second, because gender is so entrenched as a defining criteria in the construction industry workforce, the elimination of barriers for women requires vigilant external pressure. And given the high personal cost to tradeswomen involved in the affirmative action efforts in the 1970s relative to the minimal gains accomplished, renewed efforts to allow women their rightful place in the industry should be undertaken only if the intention is a serious one, meaning a legitimate career opportunity is being offered along with the access to the training that will lead to it, making investment in a 3 to 5 year apprenticeship likely to be worthwhile, meaning unnecessary obstructions will be cleared from the path by equipped institutions, not lone pioneers. meaning affirmative action works and more of it works better. Without specific hiring goals for others, any industry that relies on informal hiring networks will likely keep reproducing itself. If not as family, at least looks like me, shares my interests and outlook. When there was strong federal monitoring and enforcement, and where federal regulations were reinforced by local ones or by a developer's mandate, affirmative action had positive results for women's employment and also created a pressure for changes that would make it easier to attract and retain women. Hiring goals should be escalated regularly in order to encourage companies to incorporate women into their core workforce and to see the full training of female apprentices as sound business investments. Goals need to be written to ensure employment at journey level so that the revolving door, women working as apprentices but not making good annual wage at journey level, stops spinning women out of the industry. Meaning a critical mass, 12 to 15% of women, needs to be achieved as quickly as possible so that the pioneering phase, which has already lasted 20 years, ends soon. Until a significant number of women are brought in, the message will continue to be, women, with token exceptions, are not capable. Women are entitled to a workplace that is as respectful and comfortable for them and as reflective of their needs and priorities as it is for men. They are entitled to be settled in. Any renewed intention to make affirmative action successful needs an ongoing policy table that involves working tradeswomen, apprentices committed to making the trades their career, and veterans with their hard-won wisdom. And it can't be an all-white seating. We have to get beyond the occasional showcase job that employs women and minorities. Regional development plans need to include a commitment to affirmative hiring that is long-range and multi-project. But at only 2% of the workforce, tradeswomen lack clout and need allies. Community development groups, women's organizations, other segments of the labor movement, and supporters outside the industry need to pressure for the inclusion of more women and for the programmatic funding needed, not just to recruit them, but to ensure that they can build successful careers. Let me say that I believe that the experience of these women shows that we need affirmative action, and we need it with teeth, a full set of them that are willing and able to bite. I would like to add that there are many experts on this subject, and it is to them that the book is dedicated. The dedication page begins, "For tradeswomen, past, present, and future." For all the tradeswomen supporters who have stepped forward to train and mentor women, hire women, and support them as leaders, I want to close with a poem called "First Day on a New Job Site," which is a poem from my apprenticeship. First day on a new job site. Never again a first day like the first day, that very first one, when only the sternest vigilance kept the right foot following the left, following the right, following the left, each step a decision, a victory of willpower over fear, future over past. Margaret's out there, keep going. She's been working a few weeks already. She's managing, keep going. The legs buck. LA, Seattle, Detroit, women passing through construction site gates for the first time. Keep going, right, following. Go home if you want, but tomorrow, what do you do for work tomorrow? Left, following right up to the gate, where a man hands me hard hat and goggles and points me toward a trailer where the conversation stops as I enter. Well, what do we talk about now? Can't talk about girls. And then Ronnie, the one with beady eyes and a gimp leg, who knows for a fact one of the girl apprentices is a stripper in the zone, says to my partner, "Give me your apprentice." And I follow him tripping over cinder blocks to a small room where he points to the ceiling. I need some hangers, 11 inches off the ceiling. Here's the Hilti, the rod and strutter in the corner. The ceiling's marked where I want holes drilled. And leaves without explaining hanger, rod, strut, or seeing that the bit on the heavy drill barely reaches X marks on the ceiling when I stand tiptoe on the ladder's top step. Knowing which words to use, what jokes to banter, how to glide the body through dangers without knocking anything or anyone, learning to speak first and define the territory of conversation, passing. Another first day, the job new, the workers all strangers, all men, myself the only female, and yet we find almost easily the language that is common. Get me some 4-inch squares with 3/4 KOs. Need any couplings or connectors? No, but grab some clips and C-clamps and some 1/2-inch quarter 20s. Passwords. You know what you're doing in a panel? Sure. Mechanic to mechanic. Never again a first day like the first day. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Susan on behalf of all of us for your sensitivity, for your reflectiveness, for your extreme talent, not only in prose, but in poetry. Thank you very much. I think she's helped us to really focus on the issue, the challenges ahead, the need to recommit not only to affirmative action, but to even stronger enforcement of the affirmative action laws, and to look creatively at how to get the job done. I should add that there is a little good news, Susan, that in a few years we have developed something called construction mega projects, in which we focus on projects of long duration that will have a major impact on the community. And you should know that in a number of these mega projects, I think because of the partnership that's involved there with organized labor, the contracting agency, the contractor, and the community, we've got some pretty good news. For example, on the Oakland project, 25% of the roofers were female. Heat and frost insulators, 12%. Plumbers and pipe fitters, 16.6%. But that's not everywhere, as you know, as we all know. And the challenge before us is how to make that good news the news everywhere and to achieve the goals that you have set for us in your book. At this point, I want to open up for questions and comments. And I'm sure Susan would be pleased to answer any questions. Or Gloria might want to. Would anyone like to ask any questions? Yes, sir.
You focused on women of the period going back to 1978 for your book. If you were to talk to women today, or I'm sure you've had a chance to talk to women today who are actually going through similar experiences, has there been any major change at all in what they experience on the job?
Well, I think I couldn't talk about that. A lot of the training issues are similar, and there's certainly areas actually where, like in the Seattle, King County area, where there are high numbers. There's like 10-12% women in the apprenticeship programs in that area. So there's an advantage for women currently in terms of having women who are ahead of them, who can be mentors, who can, are sometimes running jobs or being their journeywoman partner. And I think that because of sexual harassment laws, there is much less pornography on jobs. So a lot of those kind of situations are improved. But I think there's still the issues of employment is still a major issue, and the issues of training.
Yes.
Well, now that some people are working towards some Congress people are working towards ending affirmative action. What do you see as the fate of women in construction and in non-traditional jobs?
Well, you know, I asked in the interview about that, and a lot of people, what they said was affirmative action ended a while ago, that they haven't, that they're so aware of where it's shifted from, you know, the early days where there was stronger administrative support. But I think it highlights the importance of local initiatives, and it certainly highlights the importance of initiatives from contractors and unions that one would hope would be, you know, seen as in their self-interest and part of their desire. So,
well, we certainly need to do more to make sure they know affirmative action is still alive and well.
yeah. So like the IBW Women's Conference to me was, you know, really exciting that would happen, that came from the initiative of the International, you know, to look at these issues. So I
guess traditionally, as you know, women enter the construction of industries at a later age because of socialization of the patterns. Have you seen any change in the socialization process and education process to attract women, or I guess in this case young girls, through the junior high school or the earlier years? Because that's always been a problem, as you know, when we talked before about these kind of issues. So I was wondering what you've seen happening out in the education field or other areas.
I don't know the answer to that. I do know there was actually work in the Washington State in the School of Work. That's a big effort that they're having. And actually, one of the women in the book is now very involved in that. Randy Lumen, Susan Eigenberger, in the Seattle area. Yeah, she's now working for the Washington State Labor Council as their education director, and very involved in that issue.
One of the issues that we're interested in is the welfare to work issue. And we do have some examples of women going from welfare to be forklift operators, and we'd like to explore those opportunities in other ways as well, other venues. Are there any other questions or comments? Well, this is an awfully quiet group. Hearing no questions then, thank you very much for coming to our Brown Bag Lunch. And we certainly invite you to come to future events to help us think through the issues of the day and to move the agenda forward for equal employment opportunity. Thank you very much.